Good morning. Council is convened this morning, February 18th, 2026, for a couple of work sessions. We'll start out with the 78th Street Heritage Farm, past to present. So please come forward, and we're looking forward to this.
Thank you, Council. Ross Hoover, Division Manager, Parks and Nature, and we're honored to come today to talk about Heritage Farm.
Great. We're happy to have
The
you.
work that's been done in the past, the uniqueness of the site, and how we change the nature of how community interacts with the historic and the active farming elements that are there now. And so I'm here with Lindy Wallach, and I'll pass it over to Lindy.
Thank you, Ross. Good morning. Thank you for having us today. Lindy Wallach, Park and Trails Planner. If you go to our next slide. So today I'm just going to review a little bit about the farm property history, explore current uses at the farm, give you an overview of planning history and next steps. This is the first time I think we've been here about the farm in the last couple of years. So the next slide. So since not everyone is familiar with Heritage Farm, I'd just like to start with a quick overview of the site. The farm is in the Hazeldale neighborhood in unincorporated Clark County within Vancouver's urban growth boundary. It's the largest undeveloped urban property in this part of the county. It sits on 78th Street, just west of an intersection with Northeast 25th Avenue at the top of the map. The property stretches south from 78th Street almost all the way to Northeast 68th Street, where it connects directly to another property, Hazeldale Community Park. The wooded area on the bottom right corner of the property is the developed portion of Hazeldale Community Park, and then there's an undeveloped portion, about 5 acres, that extends out to the west along 68th Street. That's also part of Hazeldale Park. And we do hope to improve that portion of the park in coming years, pending funding and priorities. Together, Heritage Farm and Hazeldale Community Park make up a 100-acre site listed on national, state, and historic registries as the Clark County Poor Farm. The farm itself is roughly 80 acres in size, but there was an additional property that's shown here on the map, referred to as the hidden property, that extends out to the east. That's not part of the original historic designation. We purchased it, I think, in 2024 to help aid in the public access improvements that we're going to talk about today. The north end of the farm is the administration building along 78th Street, which you can see as you drive down 78th Street. Also visible from 78th Street and 68th Street is a 6-foot tall chain link fence that closes off the property from casual public access. The property is a combination of wooded areas and wetlands, flat open spaces, and steep slopes that reveal some really great views, looking out over the Hazeldale neighborhood with distant views of Mount St. Helens to the north and Mount Hood to the southeast. The dark turquoise area on the map, it doesn't quite look turquoise on the screen here, but it is turquoise, represents a historic cemetery where both Poor Farm residents and community members were buried. The next slide. So just a look at the farm property history. So before non-native settlers arrived, the land was a dense forest full of massive trees and thick undergrowth, quite a bit different from what we see today. Washington territorial laws in the mid to late 1800s required counties to fund indigent care. And from the late 1800s through the mid 1940s, the land served as a county workhouse where people who were poor, sick, or houseless lived when their families couldn't care for them. And the property was known as the Clark County Poor Farm. This was the county's primary public welfare institution, providing a home and food for elderly people, people with chronic illnesses or disabilities. People were required to work if they were able to, and any excess food that was generated was provided to local schools or hospitals. In the 30s, the federal government passed the Social Security Act, which changed the way that these people were cared for. It allowed them to live independently or with their families. And the Poor Farm began closing in the mid-1940s. From there, it transitioned during World War II is when it started closing. And the property was eventually transferred to Washington State College and became the Washington College Agricultural Experimental Station. And at that time, it helped train Vancouver shipyard workers to become farmers after the war. The college also conducted research, agricultural research, to determine which crops could be grown commercially successfully in Clark County. And that work continues today at the farm. The agricultural experimental station work continued through the 1960s, and later Washington State University continued agricultural and extension work at the farm. But after funding changes in 2008 with the state, the ownership was transferred back to Clark County. And since then, internally, the farm has been managed by Public Health, by Internal Services, and Parks and Nature. But Parks and Nature has always been involved in planning, future planning for the farm property. The next slide is about current uses. So although the farm isn't open to the general public, it already serves the community in many meaningful ways. It provides a space for active agriculture and in a very urban portion of our community. It supports crop production for community-based organizations like Latinos Unidos and the Clark County Food Bank. It's also home to youth and educational programs that are hosted by WSU and the Master Gardener Foundation and several other partners. And every year, volunteers contribute thousands of hours at Heritage Farm, helping grow food for our community, support programs that are happening at the site, and also just to help care for it. There's a couple of examples on the slide here of the compost demonstration, which is done by the composter recycler program that the county hosts, and also community gardens. There's 75 plots now.
And one stat I'll throw in here. The food bank produces over 125,000 pounds of food at this site annually. And so just one data point of many, but we have many partners that operate here.
And then next slide, please. So we often receive comments from the public seeking a better understanding of the overall use areas at the site and the areas that remain open for farming. This map helps illustrate the encumbered land on the property as of today. So the tanned spaces are those that are under active ag spaces or active agriculture, or could potentially become active ag spaces. The rest of the area is encumbered either by wetlands, by existing buildings, the historic cemetery, the kind of yellow greenish areas are forested spaces, and then Hazeldale Community Park. So when we talk about public access improvements, those are really constricted to the purple areas that are shown here. And the next slide, please. So a little bit of our planning history. So as I said, we've always been planning for the future of Heritage Farm. It's been going on for more than 15 years. The first master plan was developed in 2010 and then updated again in 2020. And both of those were shaped by extensive public engagement. The 2020 plan reaffirmed what we continue to hear from farm users and the broader community even today, that there's still a strong desire to create a center for community learning and sustainable agriculture that honors the site's history. The vision for the farm is to serve as a meaningful amenity, not just for farmers and gardeners, but also neighbors and the wider community. And both master plans included a community accessible trail. The 2010 plan shown on the left here shows the trail system in white meandering through the active agricultural spaces, working farm spaces. And then in 2020, in the master plan update, those trails were pushed to the outside of those areas around the property's edges. When council adopted the 2020 master plan update, they directed Parks and Nature to develop a strategy to improve public access to the farm while still honoring that long-term vision of the property. To meet that directive, we worked with a steering committee to develop the sustainability plan, which was approved by council in 2024. This plan laid out a financially sustainable path for expanding public use of the farm in alignment with the adopted master plan. And one of the key next steps identified in the sustainability plan is the creation of the community trail, a trail that will be open to the public and include interpretive elements, excuse me, that help share the story and the significance of the farm to the community. Next slide, please. So over the past few years, we've been working with WSU Extension Services on a vision that they had for a covered space that would support a future children's garden at the farm. Parks and Nature determined that the outdoor covered space could be combined with infrastructure for a future community trail, and then could support an initiative to improve public access to the farm. Through our collaboration with Extension, we developed an idea of a multi-purpose building that we're calling the Harvest Pavilion, and that could support both farm programs and the users of the future trail. This new Harvest Pavilion will provide restrooms for visitors and farm partners, as well as a large covered space to support outdoor education and farm programming. And another major component of our current access improvements project is to develop the concept of the future community trail. So the final design and construction of that trail itself will occur in a later phase, but our current work sets the foundation or concept of what that trail can become. And the trail concept will show areas for future casual public access and a delineation from those working farm areas. So they'll be separated by farm style fencing. Next slide, please. So we approached the first portion of our project in 4 basic steps to help ensure meaningful community engagement along the way. Our 4 steps were gathering use info, developing concepts, refining concepts, and then finalizing concepts. In the first step, we hosted an on-site workshop at the farm with existing farm users and the Heritage Farm Advisory Team back in July of last year. We facilitated an opportunity for those folks to share their experiences and their concerns with development directly to our consultant and to staff. And in the next step, we work with the consultant to develop concept drawings of both the pavilion area, that Harvest Pavilion area, and the trail concept. And we met with that same working group with the farm users and the farm advisory team again in October of last year, and we shared those concepts. During this step, we heard a mix of feedback from farm user groups, some wanting the trail to stay far away from active ag areas and some wanting the trail to come closer to the areas so that the public can see the great work that's happening at the farm. And we modified our 2 trail concepts to show both of those options. In the third step, we took those concepts to the public with a hybrid open house that was hosted this past December. This was accompanied by a community survey and a public comment period. And after reviewing that information, we further refined our concepts and we narrowed down our trail concept. And we've since reviewed those with Historic Preservation Commission. Just a few weeks ago, we received approval of our certificate of appropriateness for the pavilion building. And last week, we shared our information with the Park Advisory Board, and then we're here today with you before we move forward with final design and construction. So here's a look at some of the survey feedback we received in our community survey and our public comment period. We had, I think, 14 questions in our survey. We received about, I think, 100 folks responded to the survey, and we, I think, received 6 written comments. This slide shows information specific to the pavilion location on the left and the 2 trail concepts on the right. And so you can see most folks selected that the proposed location for the pavilion is ideal. A majority of survey responses that we received were asking for a larger covered space or more specific requests for the building, which we're considering during our final design process. And then for the trail concept, we provided 2 options. Both of those were similar to the concept that we'll show you in the next slide, or a couple slides from now. But in the 2 concepts, one crossed at a steeper slope further east on the property at the top of a farm road. And then in concept 2, it crossed the farm road at a lower elevation and provided more of that view of the active ag spaces, which we'd heard the feedback from when working with the group. And that second concept was a longer trail, and it included a loop for that through the hidden property that's shown on the earlier graphics. So more than 2/3 of respondents to the survey selected concept 2, and that's what we've moved forward with in refining for our final concept. So this next slide is just a plan view of the Harvest Pavilion building. Since this is a multi-purpose building that will eventually have divided spaces, I shaded the areas based on user groups. So the beige area would be the working farm spaces or the ag education spaces. So you see a large covered meeting space, and then you see some storage space and a restroom for farm users. And then on the other side would be eventually the public space, which would be to support the future trail. And there you have 2 restrooms, and then the storage is for our maintenance and operations folks. So folks that are using that covered meeting space or the working farm space would also be able to use the restrooms in the public, on the public side of the building. They would just need to walk through a gate to get to those 2 if they needed additional restroom spaces. Then the next slide is a elevation of the building. So this has some color approximations. You can see that the covered space, you can see the covered space under it would be some movable seating, picnic tables to create that environment that the working farm folks need. This side of the building would be the working farm side with the covered meeting space and the restroom for farm users. And then the other side of the building that's not shown will have the 2 additional restrooms to support the trail. This design is a contemporary structure while remaining compatible with historic agricultural character of the site. And the design uses the use of barn-inspired roof trusses and an overall design that doesn't compete with other historic buildings on the site, which is very important to Historic Preservation Commission. This design approach including the color selections is intended to be carried forward in future gathering spaces if they're constructed at the site to create a cohesive and consistent architectural language across the site. So if we have future public, or not public, but if we have future meeting spaces on the site, they would hopefully have a similar appearance. And the next slide is discusses our pavilion location. So these are two concept images that show the location of the proposed Harvest Pavilion building. The image on the left is a little bit older, but I wanted to share it to show you the layout of the children's garden, the future children's garden that would form around the outside of it. So the pavilion building is kind of the orange rectangle, and the children's garden is kind of the L-shaped garden that would exist around it. Just to the north of that is the wetland restoration area, that separate project that is nearing completion at the site. So you can see the proximity to that wetland restoration. And then the image on the right is a little bit more updated from the trail concept, and it shows the connection to the trail system a little bit better, and it's a little bit more up to date with positioning. The white rectangle is the Harvest Pavilion, and the brown dash line is the future fence that would separate those publicly accessible spaces from the working farm spaces. This location was determined, the location of the building was determined during our work with the farm user groups. It's a compromise between two locations, one closer to the East Farm Road, which is just to the left of it, and then further east. One that was further east that we worked through with the farm user groups. And on the next slide, we have a look at our trail concept. So just a quick look at the trail concept. It was developed with input, of course, with the farm user groups and the public. And without taking you on a full tour of it, I could just point out that it begins up at 78th Street at a future pedestrian access point. The development would likely see a smaller parking area that would be added north of the wetland restoration area with a pedestrian access across the wetland. And we wouldn't have to create that access. There's actually crossings that are built into the wetland restoration for maintenance and operation of that wetland. The Harvest Pavilion would function as the trailhead location. Once you cross the wetland area, it would have maps and restroom facilities, and circulation would start here by exploring the lower elevations at the north end of the farm, and then they would begin heading south and eventually connecting to that wetland through a wetland loop through the hidden property. This portion of the trail would include wetland and habitat views and may include boardwalks. And from there, the trail would head towards the west by crossing a farm access road and providing views of the active ag areas that are currently being used by Clark County Food Bank. And then pathways up to this point in the trail would have been built to meet current ADA standards. From here, the trail will continue south and traverse its steepest slope up to the highest point of the farm. The trail section that travels up the steep slopes in the middle of the farm, they can't be built to meet ADA standards, but we will design them to meet U.S. Forest Service standards or guidelines for accessibility. And that allows 8% slopes rather than 5% slopes, but with more frequent resting spots. And now the trail continues over to connect to an interpretation point outside of the historic cemetery, and then continues south and connects to Hazeldale Community Park, potentially eventually connecting to the future expansion of Hazeldale Community Park. And the images show a proposed fencing layout for separation from those working farm areas from the publicly accessible spaces. So this is just a quick look at the accessibility of the trail. I said that the ADA, you can see at the top of the map, the white lines indicate the areas that could be built to meet ADA guidelines. And then it's actually an orange color, looks brown here, but that would be built to the Forest Service guidelines for accessibility. And then the next slide. So this is a look at our project phasing that we're approaching now. So phase 1 would see the construction of the Harvest Pavilion and any related site improvements that are required to construct that building. And phase 2, which is the blue, would include trail connections from is the white. It would include the trail connections from 78th Street down to 68th Street through Hazeldale Community Park. And then future phases would include trail connections through that wetland area, including the boardwalk, a south slope trail, and connection to future expansion at the expansion area at Hazeldale Community Park. And our last slide. So this is just our look at what we need to do to get moving forward to get these this work completed. So our first step is to work with our farm partners on updated lease agreements and streamlining operations guidelines.
So we have on bullet 1, we have in the past, we've had 2 bodies that have provided input feedback on an ongoing regular basis, one being the Heritage Farm Advisory Team and the other being the partners, the active working groups that are active on the farm. Those 2 groups have met independent from one another for quite a while. Yeah, what we've started in 26 is those 2 groups have come together on a monthly meeting. We'll meet through 26 and for as long as we need to one, identify issues operationally and challenges that our partners and farmers, active farmers, are actually seeing, prioritizing that list of issues operationally, and then together developing a plan to better operationalize the site. And those ideas and solutions are coming from the active farmers and our Heritage Farm Advisory Team. So that's how we're accomplishing bullet 1.
And then, and that work does somewhat inform the lease agreements and whatnot, informs or impacts some of our work with the public access improvements. But our first phase of public access improvements, we're in the middle of, and we would be commencing design and construction of that pavilion and anything that goes to support that after we meet with you. And we hope to have the building complete in early 2027. And then the first phase of trail improvements, we would begin the design of that. That is a whole design, outreach, and engagement process and permitting process that would begin in 2027. And then the future phases of trail development, the boardwalk and the wetland and other portions of the trail, that would be planned to be determined depending on funding and prioritization. So that's what I have. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks. That's very exciting. Are there any questions from council at this time?
Here.
Yes, go ahead, Councilor Young.
I got a couple questions. First of all, what would it mean to the entire plan, and what would have to change to remove the fencing?
So did you want to?
Yeah, so thank you, Counselor. So the fencing currently along 78th is the first thing that visitors see, potential visitors see, and it feels closed off. And so that was one of the things we heard during the development of the sustainability plan that Lindy led the process for. So that's one of the key questions we're trying to answer here. How do we make this feel more inviting and welcoming for everyone? How do we welcome community into this site? And so the fencing needs to change. And so as part of this project, you'll see different fencing go up in a different alignment. And we can go back to the map and look at that. The nature of the fencing will change. It's not a barbed wire look. And so I don't know if you want to go back and kind of look at the alignment of that new fencing, and we can show you, Counselor, exactly what that might look like.
So eventually along 78th Street, instead of the chain link fence, you would expect to see most likely a split rail style fence that would be about 4 feet in height. I don't have examples of the fence today. And then along the corridor separating where you see the working farm spaces, which are kind of the tan color here versus the gray spaces, you would see a 6 foot tall, more agricultural style fence with some mesh in it. And that would help separate the areas. We heard a lot of feedback from existing farm users that they're concerned about folks just meandering into their site. And so there's a level of importance of being able to separate the working farm spaces from the active or from the publicly accessible spaces.
And this
I'm a
is
little bit torn on that, because part of the beauty of this site is the openness. But I understand that challenge. I lived close to a farm growing up, and there were no fences around it, but the farmer had a rock salt gun. And that was how people were kept out. So, and I can only imagine things are a lot different today. There's a lot less respect, I would say, to situations like this. But it's, I mean, that may be the only way forward, but it truly is a shame to have to put any kind of fencing in that divides the space up there. It's such a beautiful tract of land.
Just while we're on fencing here, I know you have some other questions, but I think one of the real fears that the folks who are growing is pilfering. And it's incredibly tempting when the crops are ripe not to want to take a little taste. And there has been in the past, I don't know the degree to which there's active research occurring, but you can foul up a number of years of research if that gets tampered with. And I would say, and just thinking about the fencing, I know I have heard a concern about if you're doing tractor work and if there's gates, if you have to get on and off of a tractor. That was a concern that I heard from folks. And what was the other one? I don't know, it'll come to me. But I think you got to have some fencing to protect the crops that are there. As beautiful as they look, you can still look through the fence and get a gander at them.
This topic is one that we had some really good, healthy debate about amongst the folks that engaged in this process. The alignment of the trail, some arguing that the trail should go through the middle of the working farm. That's how we're going to connect people with farming. Others arguing that the trail should go all the way to the edge of the property and stay as far away from the farm as possible. So this really represents middle ground in terms of understanding how this place should operate. We heard some folks argue for complete elimination of fencing, that in order for this to be a space where people can interact and feel welcome, we can't have fences up. And so what you see is a representative of finding that common ground between differing viewpoints and conflicting viewpoints. And I think through the nature, the style of the fencing, I think it can be done in a warm, inviting way, and different from now, and still function to keep folks out and keep folks honest, and protect the crops there.
And I would just encourage, and I'm sure you do this, adaptively manage and see how this works. If you need more fencing, if you can get with less fencing, let's see how it works. And as I look at this, it looks like the trails are in areas that are not really farmable. Other
Yes.
questions, Councillor Young?
Yes, my next question was going to be, you're probably anticipating this question, but I would like to know the involvement of our Accessible Community Advisory Committee in this project, and if that touch hasn't been made, what your plans are for that.
I have not spoken with them directly about this project. I think that we are having our ADA transition plan has been conducting an assessment of the site, and there will be recommendations that come from that plan development. When we get to the trail, as I said, there will be a whole other outreach and engagement aspect to the actual design of the trail. I certainly can touch base with them before we get to that point as we finalize this concept. But we'll be having even more conversations about the layout and the design of the trail and accessibility elements concerning that when we start that work next year.
Great, and I would just say that coming to them earlier is better because they can poke some real holes, show some real flaws in the plan that we may not necessarily identify, especially when we're looking at areas that we can't quite meet ADA requirements. I think their input would be very valuable in that discussion.
Certainly. Thank you.
So, but I just great work. Looking forward to this. I really wish we could do it without fences. It really would be amazing. But you don't always get what you want.
Okay, we'll remember that. I had a question about parking. I know one of the big events at the farm is the plant sale that the Master Gardeners put on, and I think, you know, it's hard to plan for a 2-day event that requires a lot of parking. But have you thought about parking and where that would be?
So in this first phase of the development of the pavilion itself, we have not included parking specific, like for the trailhead. That would be part of the phase 2 when we actually develop the trail that connects from 78th Street to Hazeldale Community Park. And that's when we're looking at a small parking area that would likely be north of the wetland space. And in my conversations with folks who are using the farm, especially around the Mother's Day plant sale, they used to park in the northeast corner of the property, but I believe they've since stopped that, and they have working agreements with parking in other locations that have worked a lot better than the parking in those spaces.
Great, that's good to hear. And then I think it's a remarkable site in so many ways, but the historic nature of it and really the remnants of the buildings that are there, preservation of those and interpretation. You know, if there's a way to develop, you know, who were these folks who lived there, who relied on this site, I think that would be just really very meaningful, important part of the development of the site. So preservation of the remnants of those buildings, I'd be real supportive of.
Right. There is a preservation plan for the farm, and we'll be reviewing that in the coming years and hopefully prioritizing, focusing on that. And then, of course, our trail development, when we get to that point, will include an interpretive plan. There's already an interpretive plan for the site that was developed a number of years ago, but we'll be updating that as a part of the trail development.
And I think working with the Clark County Historical Museum,
Definitely.
they're, I think, more than willing to be an active partner in this. And then finally, looking at those sites that are farmable, I wonder how much land might still be available. There's a request that come to us from LULAC wanting an additional acre to farm. So, and I don't know if that's come through you or what the process is, but given the state of federal assistance, I think having more ability to grow food locally would be helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree that this site is such an important element to how we feed folks in need throughout the county. And so the current work that we're doing with our Heritage Farm Advisory team and partners is to work through some operational frustrations and challenges that have existed on the site for many years and develop a plan forward and solve for some of those thorns that folks are experiencing. And so, and some of those items are really limiting in terms of how we expand currently until we solve some of those issues. And so, I'll give you just one item: irrigation. And so, what we've already identified this in our group. We need to sort out a method, develop a methodology for how irrigation happens. Currently, there's not a structure in place for how people irrigate. There's a well on the site. There's only so much pressure and water availability. And so we will be developing a plan for how our partners use the water from the well, so that folks are not left without water for their crops. And so right now it would be a little ahead of ourselves to bring in new partners if we haven't solved for some of those really important operational kind of coordination work that really needs to be done first. Otherwise, we're just adding to the frustration. And so we will continue to work. Actually, we're meeting this week with that group to continue the conversation about solutions.
Great. It always comes down to water in the end with so many things. And I don't want to underestimate some of the conflicts that and distrust that you all have been dealing with. And I think it looks to me like you've dealt with that very, very well, because there was a lot of fear and misunderstanding. And it's really great to see that being resolved and trust being built again, and we can move forward in a positive way. So thank you very much for your work on this. Anything else from council?
Chair?
Yes.
Just a really quick question about the Harvest Pavilion. I love the design. It's got that kind of modern farm design. Will it be accessible? It will be accessible to the public, correct?
Not initially, not until the trail construction happens. So for the first year or so, it's going to wholly be accessible by those who are already involved in farm programs. And then once the trail is developed, then it will serve its function as a trailhead.
Okay, and it'll be rentable, I imagine, like some of the other facilities across the county.
Yeah, I think, so this space is, the farm is currently active with children from schools and youth groups and organizations bringing in youth and teens and adults to learn about farming. That continues. This pavilion becomes a central gathering place for that to happen, a covered space for that to happen. Outside of that programming, I absolutely think this will be a reservable space, and in the future could be a really interesting space to hold different events, kind of on the margin between the farm and the public access area. So we're anticipating some really interesting, exciting programs and activities to develop, and folks will need to be able to reserve it to do that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Looking forward to that.
Councilor Young, did you have something?
Yeah, I was curious. So what funding sources are we looking at for this project?
Oh, I believe this is funded through PIF dollars.
Okay, and then what about O&M?
Great question. So the site currently has one staff person dedicated to it, operations and maintenance staff person. The common areas are managed kind of mutually, organically between our various partners. And so in all likelihood, this space would be managed in a similar fashion between our partners and operators and our staff person who is on site. We don't see this being a significantly impactful operational burden because the activities are already happening there. And so operationally, not much changes, minus the public kind of covered space that will be reservable, and that will be managed on site
Okay.
by our staff person.
And then is there currently any cost recovery built into the lease agreements that we have, or do we look at it as, for the greater good on this particular site?
Great question. So we do not currently have a strong cost recovery model in place at this site. The costs that we do incur at this site are largely absorbed by between our parks and nature operating budget and facilities operating budgets. And so, yes, in the future, kind of a question for all of you broadly outside of just this site, but extending to all multiple parks and nature locations is what does cost recovery look like, and what are the potential models that we could adopt system-wide to recover costs to help sustain operations? And so that's a question, kind of a policy question we'll be bringing to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate the good work.
Great. And I just thought of one, I looked at my notes. I had one more question. Would there be a need for forensic analysis related to the historic cemetery? Because I have heard there may be, we don't know where all the bones are buried.
So we for the pavilion building itself, of course, is positioned quite a distance from where folks were buried on the site. But we already have analysis that's been done for archaeology, and that's been reviewed by the state that went along with the wetland restoration project. And we're confirming with our environmental permitting staff that we don't need to do any additional exploration specific to this building. I don't suspect that we do, but they're working directly with DAP, the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. When we get to the trail portion of the building, there will be, I'm sorry, the trail portion of the project, the actual design and construction of that will again have to go through an exploratory process where we understand more and investigate, do archaeological investigation of the areas that potentially be disturbed.
Thank you.
And we have been in contact with Historic Society, and they have provided a list through their research that has informed just how many we think are buried at the cemetery. That list will change and grow as research continues. And so Lindy mentioned this in the presentations. Interpretive signage and panels informing and educating folks who are visiting the site in the future about the cemetery is a really important historical component to this site, and one we need to do with reverence and honesty about who's buried there. And we'll tell that story. And so those signs will be developed at the future phase when that trail segments goes in.
Great. It's very exciting. Thanks so much.
Thank you.